Hello everyone. In this presentation, me and SİMAY will talk about the study named Chimpanzee food calls are directed at specific individuals by Shell, Makanda, Townsend, and the others. As an outline of our presentation, we are going to talk about introduction, aim of the study, methods, and discussion parts.
Hello everyone. So, chimpanzees are known for their complex social structures and communication abilities. One of the most curious aspects of their social behavior is their use of vocalizations, such as penthoods, to convey information. Penthoods are high-amplitude, compound vocalizations that are individually distinctive, allowing listeners to identify the caller. This study aims to investigate how these vocalizations influence social interactions, particularly in the context of feeding and movement. The article also explores whether chimpanzee food calls, specifically rough grunts, are directed at specific individuals, indicating that these calls are not just automatic responses to food, but are under voluntary control and used intentionally. Understanding whether primates can use vocalizations to communicate about external entities helps bridge the gap between animal communication and human language. So, in this article, the researchers aim to determine if chimpanzees produce their rough grunts in a deliberate and selective manner. It would indicate that they have some level of voluntary control over these vocalizations, rather than them being purely automatic or instinctual sounds. And secondly, the researchers aim to determine whether the chimpanzees direct their calls toward specific individuals depending on their social relationships, such as friends, allies, or dominant group members. For the field experiment with the Sonso chimpanzee community in Uganda, only male chimpanzees were used and a minimum of 3 people were required to run the experiment. And there was also a playback setup, which I will explain in the next slide. Here in the figure, we see the spatial arrangement of the observers, the social chimpanzee and the call provider chimpanzee. Let's get into the detailed explanation of the setup in the figure. The social chimpanzee is the main subject of the experiment. This individual is monitored closely to observe reactions to the playback calls. Call provider chimpanzee is the source of the calls that are played back to the social chimpanzee. The call provider must be at least 300 meters away from the social chimpanzee to ensure they do not hear their own calls during playback. And there are 3 observers, each with a specific role. Observer 1 is responsible for video and sound recording the social male chimpanzee's reactions. And observer 2 operates the speaker from which the playback calls are emitted. And observer 3 follows the call provider chimpanzee to ensure they are at the appropriate distance and location for the experiment. Let's get into the playback procedure. The speaker is placed 30 to 40 meters from the social chimpanzee in the direction of the call provider. The setup aims to broadcast the sound when the social chimpanzee is visible and not directly facing the speaker to observe any looks towards the speaker. Conditions for playback include ensuring the call provider has been silent for 10 minutes before playback and no other individuals are closer than 30 meters to the speaker. The asterisks in the figure indicate the locations of the observers relative to the social and call provider chimpanzees, showing a strategic placement to maintain realistic conditions and ensure accurate observation, and recording for the social chimpanzees' reactions.
So here I would like to share 6 insights from the discussion part of the study. Let's start with the selective production. Male chimpanzees were more likely to produce food calls, specifically rough grunts, in response to the arrival of individuals with whom they had strong social bonds, especially when the caller was lower ranking compared to the arriving individual. This selective production indicates that chimpanzees have some voluntary control over their calls, challenging the notion that their vocalization are purely reflexive. Second one is recipient-directed communication. The calls were not randomly directed, but aimed at specific individuals, showing an understanding of social dynamics and relationships. Callers frequently look towards the intended recipient while calling, which aligns with behaviors seen in intentional signal production in primates. Third insight is context and specificity. Chimpanzees called in only 24% of experimental trials following the playback stimulus, and there were no calls during the match period before the playback or in control trials. This specificity suggests that the calls were deliberate responses to the playback and not random events. The study suggests that chimpanzee communication is more complex than previously thought, showing elements of intentionality and audience-specific calling. The findings imply that the roots of human language could be traced back to such complex communication system in primates. Although there is no conclusive evidence that primates produce calls to inform ignorant individuals about external events, this study provides evidence that chimpanzees have elements necessary for such behavior. They produce functionally referential calls and can direct these calls at specific individuals, suggesting they possess a form of intentional communication. The fifth one is voluntary control and cortical involvement. Evidence shows that primates have cortical involvement in vocal production, meaning their calls can be influenced by cognitive rather than purely emotional processes. And lastly, chimpanzee understanding of social hierarchies. The tendency to call more when higher-ranking individuals arrive suggests an awareness of social status and the potential benefits of communicating food presence to more dominant individuals. Lastly, chimpanzee rough grounds are not just automatic responses to food, but are selectively used based on social context. This leads that the chimpanzees have a degree of voluntary control over their vocalizations and can direct calls at specific individuals, hinting at a communication system that has parallels with human language evolution. Here are some specific examples. While human language often involves triadic communication, involving a signaler, receiver, and external referent, such complexity is rare in non-human animals. This study finds elements of this in chimpanzee food calls. And the study also indicates that chimpanzees' vocalizations involve cognitive processes, further supporting the idea of intentional communication. Long story short, by showing that chimpanzee food calls are selectively directed and not purely reflexive, this study provides insights into the evolutionary underpinnings of intentional communication, a key component of human language. Thanks for listening.